Death and the Happy Meal by the reigning 53rd Blue Devil. December 16th, 2008. A man wearing a New York winter cap accosted me on the streets of Baker in Denver, Colorado, as we were headed in opposite directions. After the initial buttonhole, we entered a friendly exchange, whereupon I asked his name. He said, "I am Death." I said, "Nice to meet you, Death. God is my light." He asked me to walk with him and pointed his direction. I demurred and said, "My path is this way, if you'd like to join." He said, "Or we could walk down," and pointed into an alley that I peered into as he pointed and noticed all its walls were red, blood red. I said, "That looks like a dead end for both of us. As a compromise, I will go your way, and then you will go mine." He agreed, and we proceeded east, and happened to cross by a McDonald's a few blocks later, where I turned to him and said, "I am famished, aren't you?" He nodded. I said, "Good. Then we're having Happy Meals." Because it hadn't been a very successful conversation for those few blocks that we were walking. He was kind of a hangry fellow. We entered. I paid. We ate. I gave him my toy to complete his set. Then, back out on Broadway, we turned now, headed west. I brought him to the Three Kings, and I bought us a few rounds of pints, and we played many most excellent rounds of pool. We then crossed Broadway and went a few blocks further west to Sputnik's for a few more rounds. And there some of Death's friends joined us. They had arrived by bicycles that they left on the street unchained and would not return to. Death had dropped the moniker and was now going by Trusty. The most vocal of his friends introduced himself as Lefty and wanted alternatively to be referred to as LT. One other gave Chamberlain as a name. The other three remained nameless for the rest of the night. Before long, they dubbed me captain. We quipped and traded stories and drank, and Trusty and Lefty showed me hand-to-hand combat kill moves by highly deferential slow motion. I remember real slow. Lefty was showing me a jugular kill. It had become a rather stimulating affair. It had become very late, and we tired of Sputnik's, so we headed east again, crossing back over Broadway, this time to the Skylark. Skylark's owner was not having it. Gotta tell you, he was not having it. He requested we leave. Lefty stepped up and said, "One round of pool determines if we stay with a round of free drinks. You choose your champion, and he will play our captain." The owner agreed. He chose his bartender, a stout, long-haired Native American, neither young nor old man, named Richard. So we were set to play. Except right before I took my first shot, Trusty came over and removed my glasses and refused to return them until the game was finished. We lost horribly. But not before I shot an erroneous cue straight to the bank that absconded and clocked Richard off the head, where he fell and could not finish. So we were disqualified and had to leave. The trustee returned my glasses. Outside, a vicious snowstorm had moved in, and there were only 3 inches accumulated. My house was right around the corner on West Maple. I invited them all over. We went up. I offered to make fresh coffee, and they insisted to drink the cold coffee of the pot that was already there. Except, I didn't let them. I dumped it. They were all fucking pissed that I dumped the coffee, wasting it. But it was cold. And it was cold outside. And that was a command decision. As soon as I saw how pained they were, I questioned my decision. But I brewed the pot, fresh coffee anyway, and we saw past the wastefulness. Waste not is like, I guess, a golden rule when you're among pirates and thieves. Then they marveled at my library and the art on the walls, and more quips and stories were traded, more kill moves were demonstrated. Lefty took off his shirt and asked me to take off mine and wanted to show me grapples. My place had become a sort of Macedonian gymnasium. And we were grappling pretty well. Half speed, not even half speed, quarter speed. And showing each other leverage moves. And I could tell Lefty was pretty impressed that I was able to best him a few times when he wasn't expecting it. We were really deferentially 25% speed. However, it was stimulating in that we were trying not to make it a carnage situation, raising anybody's adrenaline. That was really the trick of the matter, was not to escalate or to wake the dragon of one's adrenaline rush. So then I looked straight into Lefty's face and told him I saw his many faces and recognized each one of them. He looked stunned by this information and asked me to borrow my phone. Right then and there, he's like, I need to borrow your phone. He called his mother in California. Soon after he asked me to speak to his mother, I did. What was said calmed everyone in the room by 1 or 2 degrees. I marveled at how young his mother sounded and tried to suppress the suspicion that she was even his mother at all. Then I hung up the phone and said, hey, fellas, how about a story? Because these guys were cooled by 1 or 2 degrees, not nearly enough. 1/4 speed in the wrestling matches, not nearly enough. I mean, we were pretty fucking amped. Maybe it was that hot coffee, I don't know, or all the booze, or the fact that I don't know who the fuck these people are, and there's 7 of them against me. And right before I started seeing his many faces, I said, I gotta put this shit to rest quickly. So I pulled a book from the shelf and I began to read. I was in, I'd say, 30 seconds before all 7 of them had fallen to the floor and were laying there fast asleep. So I sat on my radiator and sipped my coffee and observed the symphony of the bodies, movements by the night terrors they were all soon having. It seemed clear by their genuine cries that each of them were bona fide combat veterans of some foreign war. One of them, Trusty, actually army crawled over to me in his sleep, grabbed my phone from the floor where it was, and picked it up to me and said, here's your phone, like he had rescued it. Before crawling back over to where he had lain before and resumed his twitching and noise making that was disconcerting. I looked outside. I saw the snowstorm had become so great and blinding. It was essentially had become a blizzard. I could wake them and bid them to leave was one option. I could not sleep while they were there and so full of terror. That was not an option. My head began to spin. My mind began to spin. I was balancing myself and losing balance, and I began to course back and forth through time and space, and we became convinced that something greater was happening with their sleeping and their dreaming and their terrors, and that I was somehow responsible for either it or controlling it or what have you, and yet I was in the middle of failing. So I needed a lifeline. I called the police and I explained to the dispatch. I asked him what could be done. The dispatch, his name was Matthew, I remember that. It was like that point where I was sitting in the front of the house, looking out the window at the snowfall. It was just silent there. I couldn't hear the guys in the back. And there was no sound from where Matthew was sitting either. It was just two voices in the night. And I was staring at the blizzard, and I was sure I was among the end of days. One of the very many multitude of many end of days moments. So I asked him what could be done, if there was a shelter that they could be relocated to. He said there was, because I did not want them to go to jail. They had not yet done anything wrong. They just, as far as I was aware, had no place to stay. They didn't even know where their bicycles were. They probably were either stolen or by that point covered in 1.5 feet worth of snow and like 5 blocks away. So I said, well then, I think you should have some folks come and fetch these guys. When the police arrived, the door was unlocked, so they entered, 3 of them. I was sitting across the room on the radiator, warming my ass, sipping coffee with one hand, and holding the book I was reading in the other. I heard one of them ask me, "What the hell happened here?" I imagined he let that question out after taking note of the 7 bodies strewn across the floor. Without looking up, I said, "The answer to that question, officer, all depends." He said, "On what?" I said, "On this. Do you believe in God?" And then I looked up and saw all 3 officers were facing my direction, but all 3 were looking away at what exactly they were looking at, only who knows. So I nodded and said, "In that case, the answer is magic." Then I snapped shut the book and stood up and said, "All right, well, I've got to go piss, and then I have some work to do. I'll leave you to it. If you need me, I'll be downstairs in my workshop." The end. All right, this is a unofficial post-credit scene to the story. There's a hell of a lot more that happened that night, but it's classified. So, I mean, after the cops picked the bodies up off the floor. But I'll try to color in some of the uncolored spots here. First of all, there's like the objective correlatives and the metaphors and, the concepts of vehicles and tenors and metaphysics and alchemy, right? These things are a thing. Well, you either believe they are or you don't. If you believe in God, then you don't really believe in this. You believe in something else, and you have faith in that. But if you don't believe in God, then all you're left with in the realm of like real power is metaphysics and alchemy, not changing real metals into other real metals, but sort of doing everything else with your mind. There's a lot of orders out there. They all have different wushu, different ways of the sword, different bushido. But it's all versions of the same thing. You know, there's grapples and there's strikes. There's defensive, there's offensive. You know, and there's just the way you apply it, like your dialect, your accent, your cunning, your will. When you take a hit, when you give a hit, when you let there be a push from the table, when you let somebody walk away, when you walk away, right? When you take a stand, when you deliver, and when you actually have to zero something out. If you ever do get to zero something out, for real. I mean, like, I've written about this recently elsewhere, about not actually, even though it looks very much like we can zero somebody, not actually being able to do it for real, because it gets edited afterwards, is what I think. But these things are important to note, because if you haven't played with the magics of this physical and metaphysical world yet, you should. And in fact, you have. If you haven't consciously done it, you should. And in fact, I'm sure you have. If you haven't yet mastered it, you should, which I'm sure you have. But if you've ever fallen back asleep once you've woken up, okay, you got to wake yourself back up again. I mean, there's a difference between madness and consciousness, higher level consciousness. You know, there's a difference between maintaining a fine balance, whether that be through a good regimen or some sort of medical care, and being doped and intoxicated into sleep, right? So, I mean, you have the plus and the minus of everything. People like to call you a self-medicator if you're doing it harmfully, right? So there's no fucking difference if your harmful care that you administer yourself when you're in an outpatient or just on your own, okay, through like advice from a doctor or from a priest or from a friend, or from, if the advice is bad, okay, and you're the one who's following it, that's still self-medicating in a harmful way. There's the right and the wrong of things, and there's just no two ways to look at it. What I've been telling people more and more lately is what you think is happening at all times. And if, like, it seems fantastic in your mind what you think is happening, that's okay. Fantasy's part of the universe, too. Ideal realism is a thing that I've been working on for the last 20 years. In my mind, I define ideal realism as, well, you know, they had magic realism for a while. I just don't like the idea of magic realism. It didn't seem real enough to me. Magic didn't seem real. Magic was an illusion, right? An illusion. That's a trick of the mind. What I'm saying is that idealism, ideal concepts, ideal constructs, these are not tricks. These are actual things. These are things of the mind that are real and that you can realize. So if you imagine the wildest fucking shit somewhere in existence, it's actually coming into existence, right? And some of the wild shit that I imagine is that everything is a version of everything else. So you walk into your room your house, that whole house, once you close all the windows and the doors and that's your domain, that is the universe. And it's all relative. 5 feet is 1 trillion nanometers. And that's like going from one side of the universe to the other. Turn the lights on, turn the lights off, 2 different dimensions. These things are practice. They're like dojos. So like, in a way, kind of like if you imagine the preloading aspect to the Matrix, right? A lot of the stuff we do is like preloading, or if we are awake enough, it's not preloading. We just jack right into the main thing. We start fighting. Fighting what? Well, whether or not it's actually fighting or just a conversation. Most people consider martial arts to just be a conversation, a dialogue. And in fact, like some of the oldest methods for warfare were conducted in India. Those motherfuckers were crazy in the ancient times. They had dialectic debate. Literally, they'd have 10,000 men on one side, 10,000 men on another. Their best debater, would step forward and face off in a debate with the other person. Dialectics. They would just fucking argue. They'd wager a certain amount of men. And whoever lost, those men would be summarily executed. And that's how they ended the fight. Wasn't so wanton. Wasn't so chaotic. Logic-based. Those things were done in the rational sense. If they even employed rationality. I mean, which they had to have. But you can use non-irrationality to sort of as like a jester moment, as a waggle. Like the stripes of a zebra, to throw off your target, which was kind of funny. I studied a lot of rhetoric and persuasive argument techniques and stuff, and everything I learned, like 3,000 or 4,000 years, maybe more of certain kinds of rational, logical, argumentative practices, all seem to go right out the fucking door when I get to the real world and realize nobody follows these rules, It's some chaotic fucking bitch fest out there. Nobody speaks from their mind. They speak from their gut. They speak from their heart. And they need to be operated on with the mind. And so there's a job opportunity for those who are metaphysicians to excise the fuck out of people's idiocy if they can, if you can keep from going under the ether yourself. And the ether is not just falling asleep. The ether is like having your dragon awoken, like being irate. You lose all credibility when that happens, and everybody can get that happen. Number one trick to that, the antidote, is breathing. Remember to breathe. Remember to remember. Anyway, those slow motion kill tactics and whatever, that was training in the Matrix loading program. They weren't there for me. They were like, in my mind, they were sort of like on the job under me. Because Trusty, his rank was like Master Sergeant or Master Chief. He was like a SEAL. And Lefty was Marine Corps, Force Reconnaissance. And Chamberlain was fucking SAS, okay? These guys were not street bums. They didn't seem that way to me. I recognized them in a certain way. And we were having, like, call it Dream Warrior shit. Call it, I don't want to get too far into this, but when they were sleeping, all that shit we were doing all night, yeah, it was shits and giggles, hooting and hollering, but like those pool games we were playing, or we were doing some wagers, things were happening in the world, in response to that. There's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. There is a synchronicity. Every so often, if somebody rises to higher and higher, the highest level of consciousness, this is another what I'm talking about now is jibber jabber of a larger story called Rise of the Philosopher Kings. The Philosopher Kings are just what Plato said, but they're not fantasy, they're real. We are among them. If we could be them, we are them. And when we are, the world moves around us. We can seize control of the anima show. Not animal, the anima show, like physical reality from ideality. And that is what ideal realism is all about. And, it's part of something I envisioned as well at the same time, prelude to ushering in the pro-modern era. I got so fucking sick of the postmodern bullshit, okay? I love the modern times. I've loved every single era and epoch of human consciousness. But the postmodern era was thumbing the nose just a little bit too much at me, is what I felt. I mean, you gotta cloak yourself. You gotta go undercover. You gotta, get in there, admit the poison so you can learn the poison, become immune to it, right? But it just was not my favorite thing. It was my least of all favorite things. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. It's like some alien fucking bug that just got us, And I want to kill that bug. And I did that night. And I brought it back to life because I am merciful. But that's part of the classified fucking story. And no, I'm not going to tell you right now.